Hello, everyone. Welcome to this talk for Sea Otter Awareness Week. I'm Jen Miller, and I work with the Wildlife Conservation Network, a nonprofit based in San Francisco. Today, I'm going to speak with you about a new spark of hope for sea otters called the Sea Otter Fund. But first, I'm going to turn it over to Heather Barrett, Science Communications Director with Sea Otter Savvy, to share some thoughts on Sea Otter Awareness Week. Take it away, Heather.
Thank you, Jen. Hi, everyone. My name is Heather Barrett. I'm a sea otter biologist and the Science Communication Director for Sea Otter Savvy. And I want to let you guys know thank you so much for joining us. This is day 5 of Sea Otter Awareness Week. This is a week that occurs every year during the last full week of September. So you can go to your calendar for next year and you can add it to your calendar now. It is organized in partnership with Sea Otter Savvy, Defenders of Wildlife, California State Parks, the LACA Alliance, the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and the Marine Mammal Center. And we want to thank all of our collaborators and community members that join us in spreading awareness. Now, this year marks the 23rd year, and the theme is Anchored in Hope, providing a metaphor for optimism, stability, and a security in a very challenging world. And you can even grab your swag. So everyone can join for Sea Otter Awareness Week, and we thank you all for being here today. This week also highlights Sea Otter Savvy's Sea Otter Recovery and Community Engagement Program. We call it SOURCE, and it's highlighted by our We Were Here Sea Otter artwork. And we educate communities and stakeholders who are missing sea otters, and we offer a survey for community involvement. Now, the southern sea otter range is currently from Gaviota State Park in the south to Año Nuevo State Park in the north in California. And sea otters did once inhabit all along the Pacific coast. They are ecologically and culturally significant, and there's increasing discussion regarding possible reintroduction to historical habitats. To move forward, government agencies, sea otter research community, we need to engage communities and stakeholders like you to hear your perspectives. So if you are interested in the conversation of sea otter recovery, please take the Sea Otter survey and share your thoughts. Your voice matters. The links in the website and survey are going to be made available, and you can also use this QR code. But with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Jen, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Heather. And Heather will join me again for our Q&A after. So I'd like to start by introducing myself better. I'm the senior manager of the Wildlife Conservation Network's Sea Otter Fund. I'm a carnivore biologist, and I've dedicated my career to helping people coexist with carnivores, especially as animals return back to our sea and landscapes following successful conservation, like the black-footed ferret in this photo that was returning home to the prairies of Colorado. For the last 20 years, I've worked on carnivores all around the world, from those black-footed ferrets in the central US to tigers in India and lions in South Africa. I actually grew up in Sea Otter Range along the Northern California coast, along the foggy beaches and those sunlit redwoods. And although there are wide open spaces there, I didn't come face to face with a large carnivore until I visited India and learned of big cats living alongside people there. Here's a photo from that muggy morning on safari when I saw my first tiger, the largest big cat in the wild. In that moment, the hair on my body stood straight up, not only because I was in the presence of a top predator, but also because I realized what I was missing in my own home: carnivores. In California, we've driven our predators like the grizzly bear, the wolf, and the sea otter either to extinction or we've cornered them into small remnants of their former range. And seeing that tiger, I felt a wave of shock and an ache of despair in my stomach, and a calling to be part of returning carnivores to my own home. And so just a few weeks ago in early September, I moved back to the Northern California coast and joined the Wildlife Conservation Network in San Francisco to be part of a very special moment for restoring sea otters as a native carnivore back to their home along the West Coast. Our theme this Sea Otter Awareness Week is anchored in hope. And when it comes to sea otters, there is immense hope. But before we get to hope, I want to ask you a question about what comes before hope. What does it feel like to know that something in your home has gone missing? Something so foundational that the very heartbeat of your home has changed. There's a word I learned recently, soulstalgia, that captures that longing you feel when your home has changed dramatically, a homesickness that you feel while you're still at home. Maybe your nostalgia comes in the form of a favorite tree in your yard, that fell down due to a recent atmospheric storm that we've been having. Or maybe it's missing the carefree, crystal clear days of summer that are now less frequent, having been replaced by those hazy skies full of wildfire smoke. What does this loss, this change feel like to you? For me, my nostalgia feels like that ache of despair in my stomach, knowing that I've grown up on a coast without sea otters, and the longing that I feel to see them come home to the Northern California coast. It's my dream to see otters once again in the waters of our shared home. Of all the species native to the US West Coast, sea otters are particularly special because they're a keystone predator, and they affect a whole food chain of other species to shape that coastal ecosystem. By eating urchins, crabs, and other crustaceans, sea otters help kelp and seagrass thrive. This boosts fish diversity and reduces coastal erosion. And in turn, this bio-rich ecosystem stores more carbon to reduce marine warming events and buffer coastal eco-communities from destructive storms. In the absence of sea otters, my own childhood home of Bodega Bay has lost kelp forests and looks more like the desolate graphic on the right than the biodiverse community on the left. The signature of missing sea otters is unmistakable. And how did this happen? Up to 300,000 sea otters used to play along the entire US West Coast northward through Alaska and into Asia and Japan. After fur traders hunted them in the 1700s and the 1800s for their warm fur, only 2,000 sea otters remained. That's just 1% of their global population. Sea otters sought refuge in 11 remnant populations, which you can see here in red. And since 1911, when they were first protected from hunting, sea otters have been recovering across their range, both naturally and with our help through translocations. Now, this map shows that same historical range now in yellow, and the current range that sea otters have returned to in purple. Although otters have recovered in some places, you can still see that there are large yellow gaps in their range, like the 800 miles of coast from northern Washington down to Southern California. In California, where my home is, they haven't expanded for the last 25 years, and they still haven't made it to where I grew up, in Bodega Bay, north of San Francisco. They need our help to fully come home. And plenty of people want to help. This is a really special moment for otters because we're at this confluence of collaboration and partnerships for sea otter recovery. In 2022, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service published a report indicating that sea otter recovery along its range is biologically feasible. And in 2023, the agency held open houses across Sea Otter Range to stimulate discussion about what recovery looks like. And it's not just US agencies that are involved. Coastal tribes are leading conversations and recovery planning, and other parties like fishermen, tourism companies, and local communities are weighing in. With all these conversations, we're seeing a need for convening, coordinating, and funding. I work with the Wildlife Conservation Network, a nonprofit organization based in San Francisco, which specializes in supporting conservationists through convening and coordinating, and by connecting them with people who want to fund their cause. WCN is always looking for the next opportunity to move the needle for species, and with sea otters being in our backyard in California, we felt we could contribute here. WCN was founded to fill that need of getting conservationists the resources they need to do their good work, and to do it efficiently and transparently. To date, WCN has raised over $350 million and received a perfect score of 100 for transparency and efficiency from Charity Navigator. At WCN, we have three programmatic areas in which we do this work. The first is investing in local conservation organizations whom we invite to join our partners network. We have 26 organizations and we're still growing. Second, we invest in local rising wildlife leaders at different points in their career. so we involve 230 individuals. And lastly, through wildlife funds. Here, we're building the collective impact of multiple conservation projects to reverse the decline of a species in crisis. And we've granted more than $100 million to 1,000 projects. Through those three categories, we reach across the globe. Our funding goes to conservation work on every continent. Now, the power of our wildlife funds in particular is extraordinary. We've raised $121 million to date, to be precise, in support of 960 projects and 332 partners in 75 countries. That incredible scale of support has translated into real on-the-ground impacts. Take our Elephant Crisis Fund, for example, which was the original wildlife fund created in 2013. This fund has been a game changer for elephants. Instead of funding a single point on the map, we've tied points together, creating a protective net over multiple countries, even across continents. To date, the ECF has granted $38 million to over 500 projects through 115 partners. And we've created several other wildlife funds, including 4 years ago, we launched the California Wildlife Program, which has raised $30 million to date. On the heels of this immense impact, here at Sea Otter Awareness Week, we are thrilled to announce WCN's new Sea Otter Fund. The vision of the Sea Otter Fund is to restore sea otters along their historical U.S. Pacific Coast range. And we see the fund serving as a convening force by funding and bringing together interested parties to develop solutions that promote sea otter recovery while aligning with local community priorities. Our ambitious goal is to raise $40 million over 12 years, at about $1 to $3 million per year. And these estimates align with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and ALACA's Alliance's estimates for the realities of what sea otter recovery will cost on the ground. We've achieved this and more with our other wildlife funds and are optimistic given the level of support that we see for our sea otters. We've already raised $1 million, and we've granted out about a third of that through 5 partner grants. In April, we officially launched the Sea Otter Fund with an event featuring Dr. Jane Goodall, the world's foremost expert on chimpanzees and possibly the world's foremost fan of sea otters. Jane is a longtime friend of WCN and our president, Charlie Knowles, and has spent countless days watching sea otters there. She even celebrated her 90th birthday in Monterey with them. Jane grounds her contagious passion for otters with a contagious sense of hope. In her words, hope is the dogged determination to do what is in our power to make the better future we wish for to actually happen. With the launch of the Sea Otter Fund, WCN is joining the dogged determination of the many individuals and groups that are using their power to make a better future for sea otters. Now, the Sea Otter Fund is a tool to enable this better future for sea otters. And our approach is very intentional. Of the funds brought in, 100% goes straight to sea otter partners working on the ground. Our fund is set up with a governance structure in which a review committee evaluates proposals to ensure those projects are rigorous, and we approach sea otter conservation holistically, embracing multi-party, cross-disciplinary, and systems-oriented thinking. We're also strategic, funding the key efforts that will make a transformative difference for sea otters. And at the Sea Otter Fund, we're clear on our values. We believe that conservation is only effective through collaboration, and we aim to bring everyone to the table, even those with different perspectives. We aspire for the work that we support to be evidence-based, meaning that it's tried and true, or that we're evaluating its effectiveness during the project. And above all, we seek to make an impact for sea otters as well as local communities. But what does this really look like? Well, I'd like to spotlight one of the Sea Otter Fund's first grantees, Dr. Tim Tinker, a world-renowned expert on sea otters. The Sea Otter Fund is supporting Dr. Tinker's critical work on developing a model for sea otter recovery, which will help identify the optimal sites along the coast for reintroduction. You can watch Dr. Tinker at Sea Otter Awareness Week this Friday at noon, when he'll be speaking about some of the exciting emerging issues related to sea otter recovery. The Sea Otter Fund is proud that Dr. Tinker is among our first grantees, and we're excited to support his important research. Working in the field like Dr. Tinker is just one way to engage, and we hope that you'll consider diving in yourself with us to help with sea otter recovery. You can donate to our Sea Otter Fund or directly to your favorite sea otter organization. You can also consider becoming a wildlife champion by throwing a fundraising event either online or in person and spreading the word. And there's more information about this on WCN's website. WCN will also be hosting our Fall Expo here in San Francisco next weekend on October 3rd and 4th. And we hope that you'll join us to meet me and our great Sea Otter partners. You can buy a ticket online. There are so many ways to engage with sea otters, and it will take us all to help sea otters come home. This confluence of collaboration for otters is the perfect antidote to my sense of nostalgia, and it anchors me in hope. So I'll leave you with one final question. What does it feel like to know that your home has regained its core identity, that the very heartbeat of your home has returned? What does this reunion look and feel like? To me, hope looks like all of us who care about restoring our homes, sharing our ideas here at Sea Otter Awareness Week and beyond. And it feels like taking action, be it through giving money or time. I have immense hope for sea otters and believe that in the very near future, and with the help of the new Sea Otter Fund, sea otters will return home. Thank you for your time. And Heather, I'd like to invite you back to join me for some Q&A.
That was amazing. Thank you so much, Jen, for sharing that with us.
Thank you. And so we'd invite you to put your questions in the chat here, and we'll take a few questions. Um, and I actually have a question here with us to start us off, Heather.
Okay.
So I've been asked, are sea otters still hunted for their pelts? Is there still an illegal demand for this? Um, and would you like to start us off, Heather?
Yeah, so that is a very good question. And I get that question sometimes too. And I think where I would like to start with that is one, just to kind of go over how sea otters are protected currently and what protections they do have. So sea otters were first received protection in 1911 under the International Fur Seal Treaty. So they were kind of added into that. And that was when they first received protections. Now, later in 1972, there's also the Marine Mammal Protection Act. You also have the Endangered Species Act in 1977. So I also want to make note that there's three different subpopulations of sea otters. So you have the Eurasian, you have the Asian one up there in Russia and Japan. You have the northern stocks, that's the northern sea otter. And then you also have the southern sea otter, or we also call it the California sea otter. Now, that population, the California sea otter, as well as some other populations in the north, are considered threatened currently under the Endangered Species Act. But I also want to note that all marine mammals receive protections under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. So they are heavily protected. And so to answer that question specifically about pelts, the answer is no. So U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service prohibits the take of sea otters. However, in Alaska, they do allow exceptions for Alaska Natives for subsistence, handicraft, cultural aspects of that. And that is very, very important. I want to make it clear that sea otters and humans coexisted for hundreds of thousands of years along this coastline. And there is a huge cultural significance to sea otters to indigenous peoples. So I think that that is a really important point to make. The southern sea otter is currently around 3,000 individuals, and so they are still listed as threatened, and that has to do with low numbers, genetic diversity, risk of oil spills. So currently, no, and I personally have not seen or heard of much emphasis on the need for pelts, but it is because pelts are so special, they are very heavily protected as well. So I hope that answers that question for you.
Yeah, thanks. And I just like to add also that, the fact that the Endangered Species Act and the Marine Mammal Protection Act does play such important roles, at least for that protection along the United States coastal line. It's really important that we maintain these strong protections. And so, yeah, keeping the Endangered Species Act and the Marine Mammal Protection Act as strong as we can. That'll be critical for restoring sea otters.
Absolutely. Yep.
Great. Thanks, Heather. Well, I've got another question, which is why have sea otters struggled so much to come back along the coastlines of the US? And I'd love to start us off. I can share that, whereas male sea otters tend to be dispersers, sea otter females are real homebodies. I mean, they love to stay where they're born, and so they hug that area. And so we don't see as many females moving, and so that can really limit the ability to establish new populations. What else is a challenge, Heather?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so I think I'll take this too again with these different subspecies. You have that northern stock, and that actually has been doing recovery pretty well. But in that southern stock that we have in California, there's that big gap, right? And so that's the interest here is how do you connect these two genetics and have them return and sort of get into to return that way. And the reason for California that we believe that we're not seeing lots of recovery or range expansion for, over 20 years, I break it down into three things that yes, one has to do with females, right? Behavior. They're very site specific. They want to stay in one spot. They're not going to go very far from home. So that's one limiting factor. The next is going to be a bit about geography. So specifically where the northern end of their current range in California is around Año Nuevo State Park. And so past that, there's actually sandy bottom for a long ways. It doesn't facilitate kelp growth. And then on top of that, this is then going to let you lead into that third thing, which is predation. And so sea otters currently their main risk or their highest mortality right now is by white shark bites. So not even consumption, but just a bite. Because you can imagine being bitten by a white shark could be the end of you if you're a sea otter. But what's fascinating about this particular point for me is that you have two recovering species, two protected species that are recovering. And what we're starting to see now is these predator-prey relationships that we didn't always consider before. So I get people telling me, oh, that's bad. We don't want white sharks to bite sea otters. And it's like, well, they coexisted for hundreds of thousands of years. We're probably just starting to see what is a very natural behavior from both of these species. But at Año Nuevo State Park, we're going to go back to geography now, is an elephant seal rookery, a third species recovering. They have an amazing recovery as well. And so great white sharks, when they are teenagers, they start to switch from eating fish into marine mammals. And elephant seal weanlings are like the thing that they want. And they're about the same length, much more rotund, very, they hold a lot of blubber. Sea otters don't hold any fat, but they're around the same size and sharks don't have the best eyesight. So there tends to be this idea, well, as there are a whole bunch of them near Año Nuevo, it's a bit of a gauntlet to get through if you're a sea otter. And especially if females don't want to pass that gauntlet, there's nothing really on the other side that serves as great habitat or a safe place to be if you're not having good kelp forests, which again, missing a keystone species for over 100 years, that doesn't help as well. So more looking into what can estuaries provide has been a really, focus of a lot of this conversation as well, because sea otters aren't just, superheroes for kelp, they're also that for estuaries and eelgrass. But that sort of breaks it down to the three. Why aren't we seeing them expand their range? Could be a accumulation of that behavior, the geography, as well as predation. And so is it possible? There's always that question of could sea otters still recover naturally? Of course, there's always a possibility of that. With it going this long, it seems that there's some hindrance that might require another tool of assistance for conservation and recovery.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. And that's interesting too, because the habitat issue of them not having enough habitat, I know they also really help promote kelp forests and seagrass meadows themselves once the sea otters are there. So that seems a little bit like a chicken or egg. That's
Yeah,
a tricky situation.
it is. That is. And that's a lot of the conversation now, especially in communities that are concerned about sea otter, safety as well. Is like if you were to return sea otters somewhere, where would they go and where would what does that look like? And those are all the questions that get discussed in the sea otter research community and those discussing potential recovery and the tools that we would use to do that.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Heather. I see we have a question that's come in from Shu. What are the greatest challenges towards sea otter conservation now, and what gives you hope? And for me, I've been really excited to see all the energy. It feels like we have this swell of momentum of a lot of different types of sea otter partners and parties wanting to come together, ready and eager to talk about, the various different issues. And I see that as really hopeful because that doesn't exist for some species that are in the process of being recovered. Some species don't generate as much excitement or enthusiasm as sea otters do, and so that's a really exciting aspect of it. I do see that a major challenge is our financial resources, and so if the energy is there but the resources are not, then that is a really tough spot to be in, and that is why, in part, that we launched the Sea Otter Fund because we see that there's a real opportunity and a need there. What do you think about, Heather, in terms of challenges and also hope?
I absolutely agree with you with the funding challenges. So I think those of us that do work in this world, that's generally what we're up against is there's a lot of desire, there's a lot of emphasis, there's amazing questions to be asked and research to be done. But a lot of times we do find ourselves with how are we going to do it if we don't have the funding? So I think that is wonderful when we're able to have discussions openly about funding. The other aspect that is a challenge is making sure protections are still there for species that still need protection. And I think that that takes a lot of people maybe coming and speaking forward so that protections do need to stay. For example, for an Endangered Species Act and how important it is, and the Marine Mammal Protection Act and how important it is. And that's just something to highlight that protections are important if you're having a recovery of a species. But my hope lies within the communities and with younger generations. I feel like a lot of what I do now, from being a sea otter biologist and moving into this communication side, is getting to communicate and be in these communities and meet people who are on the ground, who are fishermen or members of tribes, and even youth who are, in classrooms wanting to learn more, and open dialogue. And that gives me hope because I think with so much stuff that can feel challenging or, you know, that we're against each other, like it's actually not that case when I'm in these communities. And I feel like there's a lot of interest about the species. There's a lot of concern about what changes could happen, and that's okay. Those conversations are okay to happen. And I'm happy that people are willing to have those conversations with us. And that gives me great hope.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Heather. I'm glad that you chose hope, or that hope was chosen for the
Yeah.
Sea of Otter Awareness Week, because that's really where we're at, I think, with sea otters. I see a question has come in from Rebecca. Thanks so much. What are some upcoming Sea Otter Fund projects that you're excited about? Well, this is a great question. We will be doing much more revealing of Sea Otter partners at our expo on October 4th. And so if you're thinking about coming, that would be a great place where we can discuss more about projects. But I will say that, I mentioned Tim Tinker and his fantastic work figuring out where are the optimal places to reintroduce sea otters. And that's a really obviously critical piece of information so we can get down into that geography that you were highlighting, Heather, because that is what matters in terms of thinking about the success if we were to reintroduce, but also thinking about recovery in a broader scale about how do we strengthen the marine ecosystems across the coast. But I'll highlight one more. UC Santa Cruz is doing some fantastic work in the Elkhorn Slough right there, looking at what makes reintroduction possible, thinking about the habitat qualities that are necessary, thinking about the actual behavior of the otters themselves. And so those are just a few breadcrumbs, a few little sparks of hope in terms of projects, but we'll reveal more at our expo next weekend. Um, let's see. I've also got a question in my back pocket here, which is about the size of donations. I don't have a lot to donate. Will a small donation still be helpful? And so I just want to say yes, absolutely. Sea otter recovery involves all sorts of work, from publishing reports to organizing partner meetings to hiring boats for charter. And so, any amount would help in that. And also wanted to just highlight that, each of us has organizing power. And so, I've run just Facebook fundraisers before for my birthday that I've put up there, and I've been so pleased to see my own network help fill the gap for the cause that I care the most about. And so, think about maybe running an online fundraiser on Facebook or TikTok or whatever your favorite social media is, or holding an event in person where you can speak about why sea otters matter to you and inspire your community to think about it. Heather, would you like to share some examples of what it's like to work in the field the way that Sea Otter Savvy does?
Yeah, no, I'd love to. So, a lot of the research that we do is very focused on human behavior and sea otter behavior. And so both Jenna and I, who are represent Sea Otter Savvy, are both sea otter biologists by trade. And a lot of those that maybe haven't heard about what sort of behavioral data collection looks like for sea otters, it's lots of hours with a scope staring at a sea otter under all degrees of weather, collecting data with, a sheet. And so that is how we started. And now we have an amazing citizen science group. So we have community members that come through, get trained by sea otter biologists to take this data. And what we're focusing on is how are people impacting sea otters specifically. And the reason we're so interested in that is because we've been seeing this over decades increase, increase, increase. So disturbance is becoming more prevalent through the central California area where you have sea otters currently. And that's a concern for recovery. And the reason that's a concern for recovery is because if sea otters were to recover naturally or assisted up into Northern California or even wherever that may be, if communities are not prepared for what sea otters bring, which is more tourism, which is also interesting behavior, they are a large weasel, they can be quite aggressive and territorial. If we don't know how to be respectful viewers and recreate near them in wild sea otter habitat, that's sort of a recipe for some disaster. And so we see that now in Central California. We want to avoid that in Northern California and through Oregon as well. So Sea Otter Savvy makes sure that we collect data on how are people interacting, how are they recreating near sea otters, do we have distances that we can recommend, what sort of behaviors can we recommend for humans, and we have all of that through our website as well. So our research is very focused on that. The equipment we use is high-powered scopes and camp chairs and that type of stuff. And we also rely on a lot of student interns and community members that come assist us with that. But yeah, all types of weather, but it's really fun to watch the otters for a few hours and just really get to see what they'd like to do and as their natural behaviors of what they want to do, which tends to be a lot of eating, grooming, and sleeping. So respect the nap.
Very true. Yeah, I really value all the messaging, and I'm going to be out with the otters this weekend, kayaking with them in Elkhorn Slough, and I'm always going to respect that nap that they have by keeping my distance. But it is so exciting to be able to get so, in the same waters with sea otters, and so helping coastal communities that haven't experienced that before understand it. That is so critical. Thanks, Heather. And so I'm gonna take our last question, which is what are the most urgent funding needs and challenges? And so, the next few years of sea otter recovery is really going to be focused on these community discussions and thinking about, are we like, let's build awareness for sea otter recovery. Let's build support, especially where we know it exists, and also hear any concerns that are present and talk through that all together. And so that looks like convenings. That looks like bringing people together, having meetings, then following up and publishing those reports from that. It looks like outreach events, like what Sea Otter Savvy is so engaged on. And it looks like funding the core staffing of some of these small but really mighty NGOs, nonprofit organizations, especially those who are working with, tribal organizations and with fishermen and local communities. So, and then I also mentioned some of the research that's ongoing about refining best practices for reintroduction so that our methods and logistics are primed for go day if and when that happens. And so thinking really proactively about what we'll need will be some of those really urgent funding needs. So I want to thank you, Heather, for being here with me and for hosting Sea Otter Awareness Day. This has been a real treat to be here with you all. And I want to thank everyone who's tuned in live and those who are watching our recording. Thank you so much for your energy and your interest in sea otters. And together we will work to bring them home. So thank you for today, and I'll see you out there. Hopefully see you out there kayaking with the sea otters.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jen. Don't forget, guys, Sea Otter Worst Week has 2 more days. You got some few more events. She mentioned Tim's talk tomorrow. That's going to be a fantastic virtual talk. If you're down in SLO County, there is a trivia night tonight, and there's also even a talk tomorrow at the museum. So check it out. Much more to come. And if you are interested, please share your voice about Sea Otter recovery. There's a survey as well. Thank you all.
Thanks all.